Have you ever walked through your own life feeling like a guest who is overstaying their welcome? You move through the days quietly, taking up as little physical and emotional space as possible. When you step into a room, you might find yourself walking on your tiptoes without even realizing it. You smooth out the tiny wrinkles in the rug after you walk across it, ensuring you leave no trace behind. You sit on the very edge of the chair, ready to stand up at a moment's notice if someone else needs the seat. When you pour yourself a glass of water in the kitchen, you do it so carefully, trying not to let the glass make a sound against the counter. For a very long time, you might have believed this was just humility. You told yourself you were just easygoing, low maintenance, or that it was simply your quiet nature to be this way. But if we are being completely honest with ourselves, it is something else entirely. It is the lingering, heavy echo of emotional neglect. It is the invisible blueprint left behind by a childhood where your presence was tolerated, but your inner world was entirely ignored. When you grow up in an environment where your feelings, your deep sorrows, or your bursts of pure excitement were met with a blank wall, a distracted glance, or a heavy, silent room, you learn a dangerous lesson about survival. You learn that your existence is only acceptable when it is silent. You learn to read the subtle shifts in the air, the tone of a closing door, the heavy sigh of a parent, and you quickly conclude that your needs are a burden to the people around you. You look at the adults who are supposed to protect and nurture your heart, and you see them overwhelmed, distant, or cold. And because a child cannot process the fact that their caretakers are emotionally limited, the child makes a tragic bargain. You look at that empty, unresponsive space and think, it must be me. I am too much. I am too loud. I ask for too much. So, you begin to shrink. You learn to swallow your tears before they can even reach your eyes, because crying only brings frustration, or worse, absolute indifference. You stop sharing the things that make you happy, because there is nothing more painful than holding up a beautiful, fragile piece of your joy and watching it drop into a void of silence. You become your own caretaker before you even know what that word means. You tuck your own feelings away into the deepest, darkest corners of your mind, believing that if you can just be perfectly invisible, if you can just demand absolutely nothing from the world, you might finally earn a tiny scrap of safety. You begin to believe that love is not a birthright, but a prize earned through absolute self-erasure. But I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now. I want you to take a deep, grounding breath. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears and truly hear these words. You were not difficult to love. You were never too much. And you were never a burden. You were just a child, a beautiful, sensitive, developing human being who was surrounded by people who did not have the emotional capacity to see you, let alone hold you. Their inability to notice your pain or celebrate your joy had absolutely nothing to do with your worth, and everything to do with their own empty wells. Imagine a flower trying to grow in concrete. The flower doesn't blame itself for not blooming beautifully. It simply lacks the soil, the water, and the warmth it needs to thrive. You were that flower trying to root yourself in dry, frozen ground. The emptiness you feel inside today is not a sign that you are broken or fundamentally flawed. It is simply the shape of the love and attention that you always deserved, but never received. It is a profound realization to look back and understand that the silence of your past was not your fault. You did nothing wrong by having feelings. You did nothing wrong by needing comfort when you were frightened, or wanting a hug when you felt small. Those were basic human needs, as vital as the air you breathe. And today, as an adult, the path to healing begins when you stop looking at that empty room of your past and waiting for it to finally answer you. It begins when you turn around, look at yourself in the mirror, and realize that the person who can fill that room with warmth, validation, and unconditional love is the person looking right back at you. You deserved that love then, completely and fully. And you deserve it right now. When we do not receive the emotional warmth, the protection, and the consistent validation we need during our most formative years, we do not simply stop needing those things. The hunger for love does not just vanish because the kitchen is empty. Instead, our young minds do something incredibly intelligent and deeply tragic. We adapt. We look at the emotional landscape around us. We realize it is freezing cold, and we build a highly sophisticated, rigid set of rules just to survive that winter. We create defenses, armor, and patterns of behavior designed to keep us safe from the agonizing pain of being ignored, dismissed, or rejected. We tell ourselves, if I follow these rules perfectly, I will never have to feel that terrible ache of reaching out my hand and finding nobody there to hold it. For so many of us, the very first rule we adopt is the rule of absolute, unshakable strength. You look around at a very young age and realize that there is no backup. There is no safety net. There is no adult who is stable enough, present enough, or strong enough to carry your heavy feelings. And so, you decide to become the pillar. You become the person who never needs anything from anyone, the one who handles every crisis with a calm, stoic face, the one who cleans up the messes and fixes the problems. You become the ultimate listener, holding open your heart to absorb everyone else's sorrow, anger, and anxiety. But you build a massive iron wall around your own pain. If anyone asks how you are doing, your answer is always an automatic, pleasant, "I'm fine, everything is handled." You convince yourself that needing help is a sign of dangerous weakness, because in your past, needing help meant being left disappointed and exposed. For others, the rule of survival is perfectionism and achievement. You subconsciously think to yourself, if I can just perform flawlessly, if I can secure the highest grades, if I can win every award, if I can keep my behavior completely beyond reproach, then they will have to notice me. Then they will have to love me. You turn your entire existence into a never-ending performance. You become a human doing instead of a human being. You learn to anticipate every single need, every shift in mood, and every potential conflict of the people around you before they even realize it themselves. You become a master at reading people, changing your shape, your voice, and your opinions to match whatever makes them comfortable. You walk on a permanent tightrope of hypervigilance, constantly scanning the environment for any sign of disapproval, believing that a single mistake will cause your whole world to come crashing down. What we are actually doing in those moments is making a devastating trade. We trade our authentic, messy, beautiful selves for a highly polished version that feels useful to others. Because to a neglected, lonely heart, being useful feels like the closest thing to being safe. Being needed feels like the closest thing to being loved. You learn to value yourself only for what you can provide, what you can fix, what you can endure. You become proud of how much pain you can carry without crying out. You wear your self-reliance like a badge of honor, not realizing that it is actually a deeply ingrained trauma response. It is the armor you had to wear so you wouldn't bleed out in a home that didn't know how to care for your wounds. But the problem with these survival rules is that they do not have an expiration date. You carry them out of your childhood and straight into your adult life, your friendships, and your relationships. You wonder why you feel so profoundly exhausted, why your chest always feels tight, and why, even when you are surrounded by people who genuinely care about you, you still feel utterly alone. It is because you are still living by the rules of a war that ended a long time ago. You are still treating the people who love you today as if they are the cold, distant caretakers of your past. You are still hiding your true self behind the mask of the helper, the achiever, or the rock, never giving anyone the chance to love the vulnerable, imperfect human being underneath. Loving yourself means recognizing that these rules served their purpose. They kept you alive when you were helpless. But it also means having the immense courage to look at that heavy armor, thank it for protecting you, and gently, piece by piece, begin to lay it down. There is a profound, quiet reality to how we split ourselves apart when we are not hidden, protected, or cherished in our youth. When the environment around us cannot hold our wholeness, we are forced to fracture. Carl Jung offered a perspective that captures this painful truth perfectly. He once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." When we look at the deep landscape of emotional neglect, we have to realize that the pieces of ourselves that were rejected, ignored, or shamed do not simply vanish into thin air. They do not die. Instead, they go into hiding. They retreat deep into the basement of our own minds, into a place we can call the shadow. Think back to when you were very small. If you expressed a natural, healthy boundary, or if you showed a flash of completely justified anger because something felt unfair, and that anger was met with a terrifying cold shoulder, a look of pure disgust or absolute abandonment, your young mind made a quick calculation. You realized that anger was a threat to your survival. So, you took that anger, pushed it down, and locked it away in the dark. If your deep, beautiful sensitivity was met with ridicule, if you were told to stop crying, or that you were too dramatic when your heart was genuinely aching, your tenderness became something you associated with danger. You concluded that to show your soft underbelly was to invite pain. So, you took your tears, your creativity, your longing for affection, and your deep capacity for feeling, and you pushed them into the dark, too. Loving yourself after years of emotional neglect means entering that quiet architecture of your own shadow. It means taking a small, trembling flashlight and stepping down into those rooms you haven't visited in decades. When you look around in that darkness, you might expect to find things that are ugly, monstrous, or broken. That is what you were taught to believe, after all. But if you look closely, you will see something entirely different. You will find that your anger is not a monster. It is just the part of you that loved you enough to want to protect you when your boundaries were being crossed. You will find that your deep sadness is not a weakness. It is just the evidence of how much you cared and how much you longed for connection. You will find your playfulness, your wild joy, and your longing to be held, all sitting in the corner, covered in dust. The parts of you that you were told to hide are not broken. They were never broken. They were just lonely. They were the innocent, beautiful pieces of your soul that had to be sacrificed so you could survive the specific environment you were given. They were the price you paid to stay safe in a home that couldn't handle your light or your dark. When you live with a large shadow, you spend an immense amount of daily energy trying to keep the door shut. You walk around with a constant, vague sense of anxiety, always worried that the real you, the angry you, the needy you, the sad you, will accidentally slip out and ruin everything. You become terrified that if people see what is inside the basement, they will leave you, just like you were left before. But true healing, the kind that changes the very rhythm of your heartbeat, is not about fixing yourself. It is not about scrubbing away your flaws or becoming a perfect, enlightened being. It is about reclamation. It is about sitting down on the floor of that dark basement, reaching out your arms to those hidden, frozen parts of yourself, and saying, "I see you. I am so sorry I left you here for so long. You don't have to hide anymore. I am strong enough to hold you now." It is a terrifying process to look at your envy, your deep dependency, your resentment, and your unspoken grief, and claim them as your own. It feels dangerous because your childhood brain still believes that accepting these things will lead to exile. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Wholeness is the only place where peace lives. You cannot love yourself if you only love the acceptable, high-achieving, polite parts of your personality. You have to love the messy, weeping, furious child in the shadow too. Because until you bring them into the light, you will always feel like half a person, forever searching for a completion that can only come from within your own heart. The hardest, most confusing part about healing from emotional neglect is that it is almost never about the bad things that happened to you. It is not about loud screaming matches, physical cruelty, or dramatic crises that you can easily point to and say, "There, that is where I was broken." Instead, emotional neglect is about the good things that didn't happen. It is built entirely on a foundation of absence. It is the invisible lack of a reassuring glance from across the room when you were absolutely terrified. It is the absence of a warm, steady hand on your shoulder when you felt the world spinning out of control. It is the lack of someone sitting on the edge of your bed at night, looking into your eyes, asking, "How are you, really?" and actually waiting in the quiet for the real answer. Because emotional neglect is built on what was missing rather than what was present, it is incredibly easy to minimize your own suffering. You look back at your childhood through a lens of deep guilt and self-doubt. You tell yourself, "Well, I always had a roof over my head. I had clothes to wear to school. There was always food on the table. My parents didn't hurt me." You look at others who experienced obvious, visible trauma, and you use their pain as a weapon against your own. You convince yourself that you have absolutely no right to feel this empty, this lonely, or this deeply exhausted. You feel like a fraud for carrying a heartbreak that has no physical evidence. But I need you to understand something very deeply. Emotional starvation is just as real and just as damaging as physical hunger. If you give a child food and shelter, but deny them emotional warmth, attunement, and validation, you are asking them to grow without sunlight. When you constantly dismiss your own history because it wasn't that bad, you are simply repeating the exact same neglect that was inflicted on you when you were small. You are taking over the role of the cold caretaker, looking at your own weeping heart and telling it to be quiet because its pain doesn't matter. Think about how lonely it is to be a child who experiences a massive, overwhelming wave of emotion. Perhaps a deep failure at school, a painful rejection by a friend, or a terrifying nightmare. And you walk into the living room, only to find that the adults are completely blind to your distress. They look right through you. They talk about the weather, they complain about their jobs, or they tell you to go watch television. Your internal storm is raging, but the outside world is perfectly still and indifferent. In that moment, a child experiences a profound sense of existential dread. You learn that your internal world is completely separate from reality. You learn that your pain does not register on anyone else's radar. This absence creates a very specific kind of phantom pain in adulthood. It is a chronic, low-grade feeling of emptiness that sits right in the center of your chest. It is the sensation of being homesick, even when you are sitting in your own living room. You spend your life searching for something to fill that invisible void. But because you don't know what is missing, you don't know what you are looking for. You try to fill it by being perfectly behaved, by working ourselves to the bone, or by absorbing the pain of everyone around you, hoping that if you give enough love to the world, someone might finally notice the massive, aching hunger inside of you. Healing begins the exact moment you stop gaslighting your own history. It begins when you look at that quiet, empty childhood house and allow yourself to grieve for what wasn't there. It is okay to weep for the hugs you never received. It is okay to feel angry that nobody ever noticed how lonely you were. Acknowledging the absence is not about blaming your parents or staying trapped in resentment. It is about honoring the truth of your own experience. It is about looking at that empty space in your history and saying, I see it now. It really was that cold. It really was that quiet. And I didn't deserve to be left alone in the dark. When you stop pretending that everything was fine, you finally give that neglected inner child permission to stop performing and start healing. Think about how you operate in your relationships today. When someone you care about hurts your feelings, dismisses your opinion, or crosses a boundary, what is your immediate, instinctive reaction? Is it to close the door, retreat deeply into yourself, and pretend that everything is absolutely fine while a massive, suffocating storm rages inside your chest? Do you find yourself offering a quick, tight-lipped smile and saying, "No worries, it's totally fine," while your throat aches from the force of swallowing your own truth? This is the heavy, exhausting weight of unspoken words. It is the physical manifestation of a lifetime spent keeping your real self hidden away to protect the peace of everyone else around you. You have been conditioned by years of emotional neglect to believe a very dangerous lie, that expressing a boundary, showing vulnerability, or having a conflicting opinion will automatically lead to abandonment. When you were a child, speaking up might have been met with a cold glare, a cutting remark, or a sudden, terrifying withdrawal of love. You learned that your truth was a threat to the stability of your family. You realized that if you dared to say, "Hey, that hurt me," or "I don't want to do that," the emotional price was simply too high to pay. And so, you made a silent vow to keep your mouth shut, to compress your feelings, and to carry the burden of silence. Look closely at how this habit shows up in your current life. You find yourself constantly apologizing for things that are completely out of your control. If it rains on a day you planned an outdoor gathering, you feel a deep, burning sense of guilt, as if you personally disappointed everyone. If someone bumps into you in a crowded hallway, your immediate, automatic response is to say, "I'm sorry." You treat your own presence as an inconvenience that requires a constant stream of apologies. Every time you swallow your true feelings, every time you choke back your anger, your sadness, or your genuine desire just to keep someone else comfortable, you are telling that lonely inner child that their reality does not matter. You are repeating the exact message of your childhood. Keep quiet. Look pretty, make sure everyone else is happy, and swallow your own life. This mountain of unspoken words eventually turns into a profound, heavy, physical exhaustion. You walk around with a permanent knot in your stomach, a tight jaw, and a chest that feels like it is being compressed by iron bands. You are tired, not because you are physically active, but because it takes an immense amount of daily life force to keep a lifetime of truth buried in the dark. You become terrified of conflict, viewing even the smallest disagreement as a catastrophic event that will cause your relationships to dissolve. You allow people to take more than you have to give. You say yes to invitations that drain your soul, and you let your boundaries be stepped over time and time again. All because the thought of speaking up feels like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. But self-love is the slow, terrifying, and deeply beautiful process of learning to speak your truth, even when your voice shakes, your knees tremble, and your heart is pounding against your ribs. It means realizing that a relationship that requires your absolute silence to survive is not a safe relationship at all. It is just a prison with prettier walls. When you begin to say, "I can't do that," "I don't like how you just spoke to me," or "This is what I need from you right now," you are doing something revolutionary. You are breaking a multi-generational cycle of self-abandonment. You are finally stepping into the role of the protective, loving adult that you never had. You are looking at that terrified child inside of you and saying, "I am not going to make you swallow your throat anymore. I am going to speak for us. I am going to protect us." It takes time, and it takes an incredible amount of practice. The first few times you speak up, you might feel a massive wave of panic and guilt afterward, as if you did something deeply wrong. But if you can just sit through that discomfort, if you can just hold your own hand through the fear, you will notice something incredible happen. The ground will not open up and swallow you. The world will keep turning, and for the very first time in your life, you will begin to feel the immense, intoxicating lightness of being completely honest about who you are. The echoes of emotional neglect do not stay trapped in the rooms of your childhood house. They travel with you, packed away secretly in your luggage, moving into every single apartment, house, and office you occupy as an adult. They show up in the smallest, most mundane, and unexpected moments of your daily life. It is like looking into a mirror that reflects not just your face, but the invisible fractures in your soul. You might think you have moved past the coldness of your history, but the mirror of the present moment always reveals the truth of what you are still carrying inside. Have you ever noticed how you feel an intense, burning wave of guilt when you try to sit down on a Saturday afternoon just to rest? You are completely exhausted from a long week of holding everything together. But the moment your body hits the sofa, an internal alarm goes off. A restless, critical voice inside your head starts telling you that you are lazy, that you are wasting time, or that you don't deserve to just sit there. So, you jump back up. You find yourself pacing around, searching for something to clean, a closet to organize, an extra task to complete, or a problem to solve. You feel an agonizing pressure to always be producing, fixing, managing, or helping, just to justify the space you are taking up on this earth. You behave as though you must pay a daily tax of exhaustive effort just to earn the right to exist for another 24 hours. You see this same mirror when you look at how you handle your boundaries in daily interactions. Think about the last time someone asked you for a favor that you simply did not have the time, energy, or emotional capacity to perform. When you finally gathered the courage to say no, did you just leave it at a simple, kind refusal? Or did you find yourself over-explaining your answer, spinning an elaborate, multi-layered story about why you couldn't make it, almost begging for their understanding? You craft these long, complicated defenses because deep down, your childhood brain believes that a simple, honest, "I can't do that right now," is an act of aggression that will make people hate you. You feel that unless you have a catastrophic excuse, your own exhaustion or desire for quiet is not a valid enough reason to protect your peace. You might also notice it in the way you receive love, kindness, or praise from the people who genuinely value you. You might also notice it in the way you receive love, kindness, or praise from the people who genuinely value you. When someone looks you in the eyes and gives you a heartfelt compliment, or when a coworker acknowledges your hard work, what happens inside your body? Do you open your arms and let that warmth wash over you? Or do you immediately deflect it, minimize it, or point out a flaw in yourself to balance the scales? If someone says you look beautiful, you quickly point out that you haven't slept or that your clothes are old. If someone thanks you for a brilliant job, you immediately give all the credit away to others. This happens because acceptance and genuine warmth feel unfamiliar, strange, and deeply dangerous to a neglected heart. You have been starved of validation for so long that when someone hands you a full plate of appreciation, your system reacts with panic, viewing it as a trap or a mistake. These are not just random quirks in your personality. These are the active defense systems of a person who grew up learning that their worth was tied strictly to their performance and their utility. You are looking at the present through the lens of a past that taught you to be invisible. Every time you push through your sickness to go to work. Every time you tolerate a friend who uses you as a sounding board, but never asks about your life. And every time you hide your accomplishments because you don't want to make waves, you are looking directly at the reflection of that neglected child. Facing this mirror can be deeply painful, but it is also where your freedom begins. When you catch yourself over-explaining a simple boundary, or when you feel that familiar spike of anxiety because you are just sitting still, stop for a second. Breathe through the discomfort. Look at that moment not as a personal failure, but as a gentle revelation. Say to yourself, there is that old rule again. There is the part of me that thinks I have to earn my spot in the world. By simply noticing these patterns without judging yourself, you begin to break their power. You start to realize that you are allowed to rest without permission. You are allowed to say no without an explanation. And you are allowed to receive love without feeling like you owe a debt. We cannot simply think our way out of this pattern. We cannot just read a beautiful line in a book, understand it intellectually, and expect our bodies to suddenly feel whole. If changing our lives were as simple as knowing the facts, you would have healed a long time ago. You already know in your head that you deserved better. You already know that the neglect wasn't your fault. But there is a massive, agonizing ocean between what your brain understands and what your nervous system actually feels. To truly shift this deep-seated chill, we have to look directly at the gap between our current adult lives and the frozen parts of us that are still waiting back in the past. We have to walk away from the purely logical mind and step downward into the quiet, vulnerable inner landscape of our feelings. It is during this difficult transition that the insights of Carl Jung offer a perspective that helps bridge this wide gap beautifully. He noted a truth that can become a steady anchor for your healing. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. When you first hear those words, they might sound like a simple call to just move on, but they mean something much deeper. This choice is not about erasing your past, pretending the pain didn't exist, or slapping a coat of positive thinking over a broken foundation. It does not mean you have to forgive the people who failed you before you are ready, or minimize the coldness of the rooms you grew up in. Instead, choosing what you become means looking directly at those raw, jagged scars and deciding that they do not get to hold the pen for the rest of your story. It means recognizing that the people who were supposed to care for you were looking through their own thick fog of limitation, trauma, and emotional blindness. Their inability to see you, to hold you, and to love you was a reflection of their eyesight, not your value. Making this transition requires you to stop looking outward for the rescue. For decades, you may have been waiting for a phone call, an apology, or a sudden moment of realization from the people who hurt you, hoping that if they finally say, "I see you. I'm sorry," the empty space inside you will magically fill up. But that is a trap that keeps you tethered to the very environment that starved you. The transition to the inner landscape happens the moment you realize that the rescue party is not coming from the outside, because you have already arrived. You are the adult now. You have the hands that can hold the weeping child. You have the voice that can speak the words of protection. And you have the heart that can offer the unconditional warmth you were denied. This shift feels incredibly disorienting at first. When you turn your attention away from trying to please others and start looking inward, you might encounter a profound stillness that feels almost terrifying. You might feel a wave of grief that seems too heavy to carry. This is because you are finally allowing the ice to melt. For years, your survival depended on keeping your inner world frozen and numb, so you wouldn't have to feel the constant ache of rejection. As you step into this inner landscape, the warmth of your own attention begins to thaw those old, buried hurts. Tears might flow for no apparent reason. An old memory might surface and make your chest tighten. Do not run away from this. This discomfort is not a sign that you are getting worse. It is the sign that the life force is returning to the places you abandoned. You are learning to navigate a brand new country, the landscape of your own true self. In this space, your feelings are not inconveniences to be managed or hidden. They are sacred data. Your sadness is allowed to pull up a chair. Your anger is allowed to speak its mind. Your exhaustion is allowed to lay its head down and rest. By making this transition, you are making a sacred declaration to yourself. I am no longer going to live on the perimeter of my own life. I am stepping inside. I am going to explore every dark corner, every lonely hallway, and every wounded room of my being. And I am going to bring them all home. It is a slow, quiet journey, but it is the only road that leads to true freedom. You are moving from a life of frantic doing to a life of deeply grounded being. And you are entirely worthy of the time it takes to walk this path. So, how do we practically begin to love ourselves in the heavy, quiet aftermath of emotional neglect? We cannot just tell ourselves to heal. We have to show up for our bodies in a completely different way. It starts with a daily, moment-by-moment practice of radical attunement. Attunement is a beautiful word that simply means being in harmony with something, listening so closely that you can hear the faintest whisper. When you were a child, nobody was attuned to you. Your signals were missed, your cries went unanswered, and your joy was met with looking away. Radical attunement means you vow to never look away from yourself again. It means you become the deeply curious, incredibly patient, and fiercely loving caretaker that your younger self always needed. Think about how this looks in the middle of an ordinary day. You are working, or talking to someone, or just sitting in a room. And suddenly, you feel that familiar, tight knot forming right in the pit of your stomach. Or maybe you feel a sudden, heavy wave of exhaustion pull at your eyelids, or a sharp spike of anxiety that makes your breathing shallow and fast. Your old survival rule would tell you to push through it, to ignore it, to swallow it down, or to scold yourself for being so weak and sensitive. But the practice of radical attunement demands that you stop. You drop everything you are doing for just one single minute. You place a warm hand directly over your heart or on your stomach where the tension lives. You let your eyes close, and you simply sit quietly with the physical sensation. Instead of trying to fix the feeling, analyze it, or wish it away, you ask yourself a question that sounds incredibly simple, but for someone who has experienced a lifetime of emotional neglect, is absolutely revolutionary. You breathe into the quiet space and ask, what do I need right now? Listen to the answer. It might not come in clear words at first. It might come as a physical longing, a need to weep, a need to stretch your tired limbs, a need to walk out of a stressful room, or a need to lie down on the floor and close your eyes. Whatever the answer is, your job is to validate it completely. If your inner landscape says, I am so overwhelmed and I need to cry, you do not tell yourself to toughen up. You say, I hear you. It makes total sense that you are overwhelmed. I am right here with you, and you are completely safe to cry. It sounds so basic, but in that exact moment, you are doing something holy. You are breaking a lifelong, multi-generational habit of self-abandonment. You are finally becoming the person who stays, the person who listens, the person who looks right into the pain and says, I see you, and I am not going anywhere. This practice is radical because it flies in the face of everything you were taught to believe about your worth. You were taught that your needs were a nuisance, an inconvenience, or a flaw. Radical attunement is the gentle, stubborn insistence that your internal world is the most important thing in your universe. It is a commitment to checking in on yourself with the same tenderness you would give to a weeping toddler. If you saw a child sitting alone in a corner, crying, you wouldn't walk past them, look at your watch, and tell them they are wasting time. You would drop to your knees, look into their tear-stained face, and offer them your absolute presence. Radical attunement is doing that for yourself, over and over and over again, until your nervous system finally begins to believe that it is safe to let down its guard. It means learning to notice the subtle signals your body sends you before they turn into a full-blown crisis. It is noticing the tiny sigh you give when you are feeling drained and choosing to cancel a plan. It is noticing the flash of resentment you feel when someone asks for too much and choosing to say no. You are learning to trust your own body again, rebuilding the broken bridge between your mind and your physical self. You are validating your own experience without requiring a single other person on this earth to approve it, understand it, or agree with it first. It is a slow, deeply emotional rewiring of your entire life. With every single act of attunement, no matter how small, you are whispering straight into the dark corners of your past. You are not invisible anymore. I am here. I am listening. And I am going to take care of you. You deserve to take up space on this earth. I want you to read those words, or listen to them, and let them settle deep into the marrow of your bones. You deserve to occupy physical, emotional, and mental space simply because you are here, breathing and alive. For decades, you have lived your life on the absolute periphery of your own existence, behaving like a tenant who is terrified of getting evicted. You have walked softly, spoken quietly, and minimized your desires, always operating under the subconscious belief that your presence is a disruption to the world. But the truth is, your existence is not a mistake. You do not need to apologize for being in the room. You do not need to provide a justification, a certificate of achievement, or a list of good deeds just to prove that you have a right to sit at the table of humanity. Reclaiming your right to exist means letting go of the need to be the perfect, uncomplicated, deeply convenient person. If you look back at your history, you might notice that you were often praised for being so easy, so good, or so low maintenance. You learned to wear that low maintenance title like a golden medal, proud of the fact that you could go days without asking for help, or that you could swallow your preferences to match whatever everyone else wanted to do. But if we look at that with true honesty and tenderness, we have to admit that being low maintenance was often just a code word for severe self-neglecting. It was a strategy to avoid abandonment. When you make yourself completely low maintenance, you are essentially telling the world, "Please love me. Look how little I cost to keep alive." But you are not a potted plant that only needs a few drops of water to survive in the corner. You are a human being. You deserve to have preferences that do not align with the people around you, and you deserve to express them without fear of the world crumbling. If everyone wants to go one way, and your heart is pulling you another way, you are allowed to say, "I want to do something different." You do not have to twist yourself into a pretzel to keep everyone else comfortable. You deserve to be profoundly tired without having to show a long list of tasks to prove you worked hard enough to earn the right to rest. Exhaustion is not a sin that needs to be forgiven through more labor. It is simply your body asking for care. You deserve to be sad, deeply and quietly sad, without having to explain to anyone why your grief is valid or logical. Your feelings do not need a legal defense team to be allowed in the room. They are valid simply because they are there. Think about how much energy you expend every day trying to ensure that nobody is inconvenienced by your existence. You hide your sickness. You swallow your complaints. You cover up your wins so you don't make others feel bad. And you carry your own heavy luggage through life without ever asking for an extra hand. Reclaiming your right to exist means having the immense courage to look at the world and say, "I have needs. I have limits. I am a beautiful, complicated, evolving human being who requires care, attention, time, and affection." It means recognizing that needing help is not a flaw in your character. It is the absolute baseline of being a human. We are wired for connection, and connection requires the vulnerability of letting people see that we are not entirely self-sufficient. You do not need to apologize for needing the very things that keep a human heart alive. You don't apologize to the air for breathing it, and you don't apologize to the ground for stepping on it. So stop apologizing to the people in your life for having a soul that longs to be nourished. When you start setting boundaries, when you start stating your desires, and when you start letting yourself rest without a heavy cloud of guilt hanging over your head, you are staging a beautiful, quiet revolution. You are looking at the empty spaces of your childhood, where your presence was ignored, and you are planting a flag in the ground. You are declaring to the universe, to your past, and to yourself, "I am here. My voice matters. My heart matters. My comfort matters. And I am never going to erase myself for the comfort of another person ever again." It is a terrifying shift, and your hands might shake the first time you claim your space, but it is the only way to build a life that actually feels like your own. The journey back to yourself is not a straight line, and it is most certainly not a race. There is no finish line you are supposed to cross by a certain date, and there is no perfect, flawless version of healing that you are failing to reach. When you are learning to love yourself after a lifetime of emotional neglect, you are essentially learning a completely new language while walking through an unfamiliar forest. There will be days when the sun is shining, when your boundaries feel rock solid, and when you can feel a deep, genuine warmth blooming inside your chest. But there will also be days when you fall straight back into the old, cold patterns. You might find yourself suddenly hiding your feelings again, smoothing out those invisible wrinkles in the rug, or apologizing frantically for a mistake that wasn't even yours. You might wake up one morning and feel that familiar, heavy blanket of emptiness sitting on your chest, making you feel like you haven't made any progress at all. When those days happen, and they will happen, I want you to let them happen with an immense amount of grace and tenderness. Do not use your setbacks as a stick to beat yourself with. Do not look at your fear and say, "See, I'm broken. I'll never get better." Healing is not about the absolute absence of fear or loneliness. It is about what you do when those feelings arrive. It is about building a home so safe, so warm, and so sturdy inside your own mind that when the cold winds of your past blow through, you don't have to run outside to look for shelter. You know exactly how to light the fire, wrap yourself in a blanket, and keep yourself warm until the storm passes. Jung left us with a final, profound piece of wisdom that serves as a beautiful map for this return to the self. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Think about that word, privilege. It means that coming home to yourself is not a chore, a duty, or a grueling task you must perform to be worthy. It is a sacred gift. For years, who you truly were was locked away in a dark room because it wasn't safe to come out. You had to pretend to be someone else, the fixer, the helper, the invisible one, just to survive. But the survival era of your life is over. The doors are unlocked, the walls are down, and you are being invited to step out into the sunlight of your own life. Becoming who you truly are means letting go of the false versions of yourself that you created to stay alive. It means realizing that your true self is not something you have to manufacture or build from scratch. It is something you simply have to remember and reclaim. When you return to the self, the world around you begins to shift in the most beautiful ways. You stop looking at every relationship as an audition where you must prove your worth, and you start looking at them as spaces where you deserve to be seen and nourished. You stop letting people treat you like an afterthought because you no longer treat yourself like an afterthought. You begin to experience the sheer, intoxicating joy of your own company. You can sit in a quiet room, completely alone, and feel a deep sense of companionship with the person inside your skin. You become your own best friend, your own fiercest protector, and your own most patient listener. You survived the heavy, freezing silence of your past, and that means you are incredibly resilient. You possess a quiet, unbreakable strength that carried you through the darkest nights of your childhood all the way to this exact moment. But you were not born just to carry heavy burdens. You were not put on this earth merely to survive the cold. It is finally time to take that immense, beautiful resilience and use it not just to survive, but to truly, deeply live. Look back one last time at that child who was left alone in the quiet room. See them clearly in your mind. They are not waiting for the people who neglected them to change. They are waiting for you. Walk into that room, look into their eyes, and extend your hand. Tell them that the wait is over. You deserved love then, completely and unconditionally, just because you were a living child.